The call came on a freezing December night. My father's voice was flat, almost casual, but the words carved into me like ice. "Emily, if you don't apologize to Madison at the New Year's Eve party, you are no longer my daughter." Behind him I could hear clinking glasses, music, laughter, the sound of a family I had held together with my silence. For 7 years, I had paid their hospital bills, their utilities, even Madison's rent, over $48,000 in all. I told myself it was love that one day they would see me, but in that moment I understood the truth. I was never their daughter. I was only the wallet they could discard. The wind rattled against the windows of my Lakeview apartment as I set a plastic container of leftover pasta onto the coffee table. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. The wind rattled against the windows of my Lakeview apartment as I set a plastic container of leftover pasta onto the coffee table. My body ached from the long shift at Great Lakes logistics hours, buried in spreadsheets that never seemed to end. The city outside was muffled by the cold, the kind of Chicago night where December felt heavier than the month before. I had just curled up on the couch, fork in hand, when my phone lit up. The screen showed one word: Dad. For a moment I froze, fork suspended midair. Calls from my father rarely brought good news. My thumb hovered before I finally swiped to answer. "Hello," I said, trying to sound steady. His voice cut through, flat and cold. "Emily, if you don't apologize to your sister at the New Year's Eve party, you are no longer my daughter." The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the plate, red sauce smearing across the table. I blinked, thinking I had misheard. "What?" "You heard me," he said, sharper this time. Behind his words, I caught the sound of clinking glasses, laughter music. Like the background of a party I wasn't invited to. "Either you make this right with Madison in front of everyone, or you are out of this family." My hand trembled so badly I pressed it against my thigh, trying to anchor myself. "Dad, I've done nothing but help this family. Enough," he interrupted. "Don't make excuses. This isn't about you. Madison deserves respect. You either apologize or you're done. Simple as that." The line went quiet except for muffled cheering in the background. I imagined him standing in someone's living room, drink in hand, smiling while he told his eldest daughter she was expendable. "Dad," I whispered, my throat tightening. "Do you realize what you're saying? You're cutting me out of my own family." "Think about what I said," he replied. His tone was final, immovable. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly onto the couch cushion. The hum of the radiator filled the silence, steady and low, but my chest felt hollow, as if the air had been pulled out of me. My reflection caught in the dark TV screen. Tired eyes, unkempt hair, the face of someone who had carried too much for too long. The words replayed in my head. "If you don't apologize, you are no longer my daughter." I remembered every hospital bill I had covered, every utility statement I had quietly transferred into my account, every desperate late-night text from Madison promising she'd pay me back. $48,000 over 7 years. My savings gone. My dreams postponed. And still it wasn't enough. To them, I wasn't Emily, their daughter. I was just a wallet with a pulse. The smell of reheated pasta turned sour in my nose. I pushed the container aside and buried my face in my hands. My fingers pressed into my temples as if I could squeeze out the memories crowding in. Mom praising Madison's new car, Dad toasting her at Thanksgiving, while ignoring me the way relatives always asked about her promotions, her vacations, her fiancé. Not once did anyone ask how I was keeping the lights on at home or what it cost me to send money I didn't have. My hands fell into my lap. I stared at the phone, the silence of the apartment closing in around me. For years I told myself I could endure it if it meant being loved. If I kept giving, eventually they would see me. But now my own father had said the words aloud. If I didn't bow my head in front of Madison, I wasn't family anymore. I leaned back against the couch, eyes burning. The city lights glowed faintly through the blinds, blurred from the sting of unshed tears. Somewhere down on the street, a car horn blared, the sound indifferent to the wreckage inside me. The fork lay abandoned on the table, a smear of sauce across the plate like blood against porcelain. I pressed my palms together, fighting the shake in my hands. With them, I was never a daughter, I thought, the words forming clear and sharp in my mind. I was just their bank account. The echo of my father's voice lingered, cutting deeper than the winter wind outside. It settled in my chest like a weight I wasn't sure I could carry anymore. I was 8 years old the summer Madison got her brand new purple bike. It had a white basket with pink ribbons streaming from the handlebars, the kind of bike every little girl in Naperville seemed to dream about. Dad wheeled it into the driveway with a grin on his face, and Mom clapped her hands like he had just brought home a crown jewel. Madison squealed, hugging them both before hopping on and pedaling circles around me. I stood barefoot on the concrete, clutching a wilted daisy I had picked from the yard, trying to smile as if I was just as excited. No one noticed that I had outgrown my own bike 2 years earlier. Its chain rusted the tires soft, leaning against the garage wall like an afterthought. I wanted to say something to remind them, but Mom was already snapping pictures of Madison. Dad was adjusting the seat for her comfort, and my words stayed buried in my throat. The following summer, Madison was signed up for camp in Wisconsin. Mom packed her trunk with granola bars and handwritten notes tucked between shirts, telling her how proud she was. Dad carried the heavy bag out to the bus, his chest puffed like he was sending a champion into battle. I remember standing on the curb with my hands folded, watching Madison climb the bus steps, her hair tied neatly with a ribbon. She waved like royalty. When the bus pulled away, I turned to Mom, hopeful. Maybe she had plans for me too. Instead, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm. A list. The lawn needs mowing twice a week, Emily. And I need you to handle the dishes and help with dinner while I'm working late. You're the responsible one. Responsible. That word stuck to me like glue. I pushed the paper into my pocket and nodded, but inside I wanted to scream. Madison roasted marshmallows by a lake in Wisconsin while I scrubbed pans and listened to the hum of the neighbor's lawnmower through the window. There were family parties, 2 crowded dining rooms filled with uncles and cousins. One night, Uncle George toasted his retirement, and afterward Dad stood up with a glass of wine in hand. "Let's celebrate Madison," he announced. "She's been accepted into the advanced math program. She's destined for big things." Applause filled the room, hands clapping, relatives smiling at my sister as though she was a star on stage. I swallowed hard, clutching the ribbon I had just won for the district spelling bee. My heart pounded as I tried to find the courage. I began, my voice trembling, but Cousin Kelly leaned across the table, cutting me off with, "Madison, tell me about the program. Do you get to do competitions?" The attention shifted instantly, everyone leaning toward Madison, firing off questions, praising her talent. My words dissolved into the clinking of glasses. I lowered my ribbon into my lap cheeks, burning, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. Later that evening, I overheard Mom talking on the porch with Mrs. Wilkins, the neighbor. Her voice was warm, brimming with pride. "Madison is our pride and joy. She's just so full of promise. Emily's sweet, of course, but Madison, she's special." I froze in the hallway, the words piercing deeper than any insult. Sweet. That was me. Sweet, dependable, the one who mowed the lawn and handled the bills of daily life even as a child. Not brilliant, not dazzling, not the pride of the family. I learned to play my role in silence. When Madison performed at her volleyball games, Mom filmed every point. When she debated in high school, Dad wore his best suit. My own science fair project sat unnoticed, my choir solo, finished with no camera pointed my way. I smiled anyway, clapping for her, swallowing the sting. One night, I came home from an honors ceremony with a certificate tucked under my arm. 16 years old, nervous, but excited. Mom was ironing Madison's prom dress in the dining room, steam rising as the iron hissed. I held up the paper. "Look, Mom, I made the honor roll." She glanced, smiled politely, then nodded toward the fridge. "Put it there, honey. We've got to get this dress ready before Saturday. I pinned the certificate under magnets half covered by Madison's college brochures and invitations. My chest tightened as I realized no one would remember. That summer, lying awake in my small bedroom, I stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling. I clutched my spelling bee ribbon, whispering the words I had memorized as if practicing would make someone notice. I imagined a world where my parents looked at me the way they looked at Madison, eyes bright with admiration, voices thick with pride. But the truth seeped in, slow and relentless. I was never going to be that child. I was the shadow standing beside her light. Mini climax came quietly. I can still see myself at 10 years old curled up on my bed with that flimsy ribbon pressed to my chest. The room was dark, the house buzzing with Madison's laughter from down the hall. I whispered congratulations to myself because no one else would. That night I understood what it meant to be invisible in my own family, and I started to believe it was the only place I belonged. Bills and receipts were spread across my kitchen table like fallen leaves, edges curling ink smudged from years of handling. I had pulled everything out of drawers and folders, determined to see it all in one place to stop pretending I didn't know the total. The glow from the desk lamp was the only light in the apartment, casting long shadows over the piles that seemed taller every time I looked. I opened the blue binder I had bought at a Walgreens months earlier, slid a fresh sheet of paper inside, and picked up my pen. The first line I wrote made my stomach twist. 2016, Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Dad's heart surgery. Insurance covered part of it, but the remaining balance fell to me, $800 to $500. I underlined the number, the ink digging into the page. My hand hesitated as I moved to the next line, but there was no point in stopping now. 2017-2021. Utilities. ComEd Nicor Gas Xfinity, average of $245 a month stretched over 4 years, $14,700. I highlighted the number in yellow, the marker bleeding through the page, leaving a faint glow on the back. I remembered every phone call from Mom thanking me offhandedly for keeping the Wi-Fi running so she could stream movies. She never asked how. She never wondered why it was always me. My chest grew tighter as I reached for the last stack, Madison's emergencies, or at least what she had called emergencies. Rent shortfalls, maxed out credit cards, surprise flights to Miami or Denver that magically aligned with vacation photos later posted online. 2018-2023. Madison's debts, $25,000. I stopped writing and stared at the number. My pen left a dot of ink that spread slowly into the paper like a bruise. 25,000. The weight of it pressed down on me until my vision blurred. I flipped back through old text messages, screen glowing cold against my face. I promise, Em, just this one time, I'll pay you back next week. Heart emojis and exclamation marks scattered like confetti. None of it ever came true. I pressed the messages to the page with tape, building a paper trail no one in my family could deny. The final number glared up at me, $48,200. I leaned back, gripping the arms of the chair until they creaked. The air in the room felt heavy, like I was breathing through wool. $48,000. Money that could have knocked down half my student loans. Money that could have been the down payment on a condo somewhere in the city. Money that could have bought me freedom. Instead, it had dissolved into hospital bills, utility payments, and Madison's cocktails in Miami. My throat ached. I dragged the highlighter across the total, the fluorescent yellow screaming at me, daring me to look away. That's a new car, I whispered to myself. That's a life. But it wasn't mine. I glanced around the apartment. The bare walls, the sagging couch I had picked up from Craigslist, the carpet stained near the window from an old radiator leak. This was what was left after years of sacrifice. I scribbled a note under the total price of silence. The letters slanted uneven, but they felt truer than anything else on the page. My chest heaved as I pushed the papers together, hole-punched them, slid them into the binder, page after page, each one heavier than the last. By the time I closed the cover, the weight in my hands felt like a stone. I traced the black letters I had scrawled across the front weeks earlier. What I have done, and what I will no longer do. The ink had faded slightly, but the words stared back at me relentless. For years I told myself family meant sacrifice, that keeping the lights on and saving them from debt was my role, my duty. But staring at that binder, I felt the lie unravel. This wasn't love. This wasn't respect. It was debt collection disguised as family. I set the binder on the table, my palms flat against the cover, my breath shallow. The heater clicked on in the corner, rattling as it pushed out lukewarm air, but the chill in my body didn't move. I imagined Madison swiping my card for a designer bag, Dad watching TV in a warm house I had paid to heat, Mom cooking with electricity I had kept running, and me sitting here in the dim light counting the cost. My pen rolled off the table and clattered to the floor, breaking the silence. I bent to pick it up, gripping it so hard the plastic bent. No more, I whispered the words barely audible, but they vibrated through me like a promise. I slid the binder shut with a sharp thud. The sound echoed in the small apartment, final and certain. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the dependable daughter or the invisible sister. I felt like a woman holding proof that I had been bled dry, and I knew I couldn't let it continue. The Honda's muffler rattled as I pulled into my parents' driveway, the odometer flashing just past 142,000 miles. A store-bought pumpkin pie sat on the passenger seat, its plastic lid fogged from the warmth of the car. I killed the engine, listening to the tick of cooling metal, and sat there for a second longer than I needed to. The Carter house glowed with golden lights, windows steamed from heat and laughter. Headlights swept across the yard, and a silver Lexus rolled in right behind me. The car purred, sleek and spotless, like something out of a commercial. Madison stepped out in a wool coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Daniel circled to her side, opening the door with a smile like he was chauffeuring royalty. "Madison, look at that car," Uncle Frank's voice carried across the driveway as the front door burst open. Mom hurried down the steps, her arms wide, almost tripping on the last one. "It's beautiful, Daniel. You treat her so well." I climbed out of my civic pie, balanced carefully in my hands, but no one turned. The group swarmed around Madison, running their fingers over the polished hood, laughing as if the Lexus itself was a guest of honor. Inside, the dining room table stretched the length of the room, draped in a cream tablecloth. Candles flickered in the center light, catching on the glassware. At one end, Madison's chair was marked with a bouquet of yellow flowers tied to the back. A delicate touch Mom must have added. My chair further down was bare, the cushion torn slightly at the seam. Dinner began in a flurry of dishes passed around. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes. I kept my hands busy, refilling glasses, slipping bread onto plates, trying not to notice how every conversation bent toward my sister. "So, Madison, have you picked the honeymoon spot yet?" Aunt Susan leaned in, pearls catching the candlelight. "We're thinking Maui," Madison said, breezily tossing her hair back. Daniel's parents might even cover the resort. The table erupted in admiration. "Of course they will, Maui. How perfect." I cleared my throat softly. "Actually, I got promoted last month. I'm handling larger accounts now at Great Lakes." But before the words could settle, Cousin Kelly piped up. "Madison, what colors are you choosing for the reception?" The topic swerved away from me like it always did. I lowered my gaze, pushing a green bean around my plate. Daniel chuckled, cutting into his turkey. "She deserves all of it. She works so hard." The approval rippled down the table, everyone nodding. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile, biting back everything I wanted to scream. Aunt Carol reached across, her voice laced with a kind of pity that stung worse than mockery. "At least you're good with numbers, Emily. Not everyone can do that." A light laugh bubbled around the table, casual, careless. I nodded, cheeks burning. "Yeah, someone has to be." The words felt like ash in my mouth. The meal dragged on, punctuated by praise for Madison's Lexus, Madison's dress, Madison's sparkling future. I chewed each bite of turkey like sawdust, listening to the rhythm of approval that never missed a beat. My eyes flicked to the flowers tied to her chair, bright against the wood. My own chair felt like a placeholder, nothing more. When the pie came out, I slid my store-bought dessert onto the counter. Mom barely glanced at it before setting Madison's homemade apple crisp in the center of the table, the dish already surrounded by compliments. I sat in silence, the fork heavy in my hand, until Dad stood up, his glass raised high. His cheeks flushed from wine, his voice booming. To Madison he declared, pride swelling in every word, "Our shining star." The table cheered, glasses clinked, and Madison beamed. I lifted my water glass, slowly staring through it, watching the candlelight fracture into broken shapes. The noise around me blurred into a dull roar, and I sat perfectly still as though I had vanished from the room altogether. The office buzzed with the low hum of copy machines and the tap of keyboards, but all I could hear was the pounding in my head. My eyes burned from another night of restless sleep, and the numbers on my screen blurred together into meaningless rows. Deadlines piled up like bricks on my shoulders. By mid-morning, I had drained the last of my lukewarm coffee, my hands still trembling as I reached for another spreadsheet. Emily. I looked up to see Grace Turner standing at the edge of my cubicle. She was in her mid-40s, sharp but calm, the kind of manager who could silence a room without raising her voice. Her eyes softened as she took me in. "You've been at this since before I walked in," she said. "Come with me. Now." I started to protest, mumbling something about pending reports, but she raised her eyebrows in a way that brooked no argument. I shut down my screen and grabbed my coat. We walked down the block to a cafe tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. The air inside was warm, the smell of roasted beans cutting through the December chill. Soft jazz played overhead and couples huddled by the window sipping lattes. Grace ordered a cappuccino while I stuck to plain black coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu. She leaned forward once we settled into a corner table. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." I gave a small laugh, thin and unconvincing. "Just work. You know how it is." Her gaze didn't waver. "I've been in this business long enough to know when someone's running on fumes. And it's not just here, is it?" I shifted uncomfortably, fingers tracing the rim of my cup. The words struck too close to home. "I'm fine," I lied. "Emily," she said gently, You're holding up everyone else's roof while yours is caving in." She let the silence hang for a moment. Then she said something that lodged itself deep inside me. "Boundaries are not cruelty. They are love with a backbone." The phrase startled me sharper than any lecture. I stared into my coffee, watching the steam curl, feeling something inside me twist. You keep giving until there's nothing left. Grace continued. And the truth is they don't see it. They expect it. You're the one breaking under it. A lump formed in my throat, but I forced a nod. "Maybe you're right." She smiled faintly. "You're sharp, Emily. You've got discipline." "Have you ever thought about an MBA?" I blinked. "An MBA. Me? No, I couldn't. Too expensive, too competitive." Grace sipped her cappuccino, eyes never leaving mine. Northwestern. Kellogg. It's hard, but it's doable. People like you thrive there. Stop dismissing yourself before you've even tried. I shook my head quickly, heat rising to my face. That's for people with resources, with parents who back them, not... My voice trailed off. "Not you," she finished softly. "Don't sell yourself short. I see potential you refuse to see." The words lingered all afternoon through every email, every spreadsheet I typed, half blind. By the time I got home, I was too wired to sit still. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and pulled out my laptop. Typing Kellogg MBA Northwestern into the search bar felt like stepping onto forbidden ground. The website lit up with glossy photos of students in suits, classrooms overlooking Lake Michigan, smiling graduates tossing their caps. Words like leadership, transformation, future seemed to shout from the screen. I scrolled through admission requirements, GMAT scores, tuition costs. My stomach flipped equal parts fear and longing. The numbers terrified me, but the testimonials made something ache inside. Coming here changed my life, one alum wrote. Another Kellogg gave me the voice I never knew I had. I sat back, the glow of the laptop casting my small living room in pale blue light. For years, every spare dollar had vanished into other people's emergencies. Every dream I'd had was shelved for later, always later. But now, for the first time, I let myself picture it. Me walking across that campus in Evanston casebooks in hand, wind whipping off the lake. Me sitting in a lecture hall, my name on a placard, not as a shadow, but as someone who belonged. The thought made my chest ache in a way that wasn't entirely painful. It was like breathing in cold air too fast. Sharp, shocking, but alive. I closed the laptop after midnight, hands trembling as if I'd just confessed a secret. The room around me was still the same, the sagging couch, the cluttered table, the hum of the radiator. But my eyes felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't just calculating how much I owed or how much I'd already given away. I was imagining what I might keep for myself. And for a brief moment, the darkness of the apartment didn't feel so suffocating. It felt like the start of something I didn't dare name yet, but desperately wanted to. I spotted her immediately tucked into the corner of the cafe on Clark Street, a leather briefcase at her side, and a half-drunk latte cooling in front of her. Samantha Brooks hadn't changed much since Northwestern. Same confident posture, same sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. She smiled when she saw me rising to hug me tight. "It's been too long," she said. "Sit down. Tell me what's going on." I sank into the chair across from her, the noise of the cafe blurring into a hum around us. My hands shook as I stirred my coffee, though I hadn't even added sugar. "Sam, I need to ask you something I should probably already know the answer to. If an account or a bill or a card is in my name, can I stop paying for other people? Legally, I mean." She tilted her head, studying me. "Whose bills?" "My parents. My sister. For years I've been covering things. Hospital balances, utilities, rent. Half of it's not even mine." My voice cracked. "And I'm drowning." Sam leaned back, tapping a finger on her cup. "Emily, listen to me. If the account is in your name, you control it. If they're authorized users on your card, you can remove them. If the utilities are linked to your account, you can disconnect them. They can't sue you for refusing to bankroll their lives. It's your money. Your name. Your decision." The words felt like oxygen filling my lungs. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath until then. "So I won't get in trouble." "Not unless you've signed a contract making you liable for their debts, which you haven't. From what you're telling me, they've been leaning on your kindness, not any legal obligation." She gave me a look that was both kind and firm. "It's time you set boundaries. If they're upset, that's emotional fallout, not legal consequence." I pressed my palms together on the table, fighting the sting in my eyes. "Thank you. I just needed someone to say it." She reached across, squeezing my hand. "You deserve to keep what's yours." The next morning, I walked into First Chicago Bank with my binder tucked under my arm. The marble lobby felt colder than usual, the echo of heels clicking on the tile surrounding me as I approached the counter. "I need to remove an authorized user," I told the banker, sliding over my card. Her polite smile didn't falter as she typed on her computer. "Name of the user, Madison Carter." A few keystrokes later, she nodded. "All right, Ms. Carter, it's done. She'll no longer have access." The pen shook slightly in my grip as I signed the confirmation. Relief and terror twisted together in my stomach. From there, I drove to the Verizon store, my Civic's heater rattling against the winter wind. The clerk, a young man with glasses and a weary smile, pulled up the account details. "You're the primary on a family plan of 4, he explained. "I want to split mine off. Just me. Separate account." He hesitated. "You'll lose the bundle discount. I don't care." He nodded, printed the forms. My signature scratched across the page, uneven but determined. As he clicked through the computer, I imagined the moment Madison tried to call, and realized she wasn't on my plan anymore. My hands trembled, but for once it wasn't from fear. Back at home, I booted up my laptop. The screen's glow lit the dark apartment as I logged into ComEd Nicor Gas Xfinity. One by one, I deleted my card from each profile. My cursor hovered for a second before hitting remove, and with every click, a new weight slid off my chest. When it was done, I leaned back in the chair, my breath shallow. The binder sat open beside me, pages of numbers and taped text messages staring up like witnesses. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting moment I could see it Madison at a boutique downtown Arms loaded with dresses handing my card to the cashier. The swipe, the pause, the screen flashing red, declined, her smile freezing, the color draining from her face. The image made me exhale a laugh. Short, sharp-edged with something darker than humor. For the first time, the balance of power tilted, even if only in my imagination. And I wasn't just the dependable sister anymore. I was the one who had finally said no. The call came just as I was finishing a load of laundry, the dryer rattling in the corner of my apartment. I almost didn't answer, but the name flashing across my screen made me sigh. Jason Miller, my cousin. Hey. He started, voice too casual. Listen, I need a favor. My landlord's breathing down my neck. I'm short $600 to keep my place. Can you spot me? Just until next week. My stomach nodded. I knew that phrase. Just until next week. Ding. I'd heard it from Madison 100 times from my parents when the gas bill came from Jason himself when he borrowed 20 here, 50 there. Next week never came. Jason, I can't, I said quietly. You can't. His tone sharpened. Come on, Em. It's $600. You make good money at that office job? You know I'll pay you back. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, staring at the cracked tile near the sink. No. I mean it. I can't. I won't. Silence. Then a low chuckle that turned bitter fast. Unbelievable. You've always thought you were better than the rest of us. Everyone says you're selfish, and now I see it. You won't even help family. My jaw tightened. I have helped family Jason. More than you know. Yeah, right. Madison's right about you, he snapped. You're cold. You don't care about anyone but yourself. The words hit like fists, but instead of crumbling, something inside me hardened. My hand trembled, but it wasn't fear this time. It was anger, sharp and steady. I'm not giving you $600, I said, every syllable clipped. Figure it out. He swore under his breath, then hung up. The apartment went silent except for the thump of the dryer. I lowered the phone slowly, my heart racing. For years, I'd been the one to say yes, the one to dig into my account, to juggle bills, to sacrifice. And what had it earned me? A reputation as selfish anyway. My fingers were still shaking as I pulled the blue binder toward me. I flipped to a clean page, wrote in block letters, Jason, $600 request. Refused. The word refused sat on the page like a flare. I traced over it twice with my pen, the ink bleeding until it almost tore the paper. I leaned back in my chair, breathing hard. No tears came. No hollow ache of guilt like before. Just heat in my chest, simmering and solid. For the first time I had said no, and for the first time I hadn't fallen apart after saying it. I closed the binder gently, resting my palm on the cover. My reflection in the darkened window across the room looked different, sharper, like someone learning to stand. The phone buzzed again, another call from Jason. I let it ring until it stopped, the sound fading into the hum of the dryer. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt like space. Space I had finally cleared for myself. The Hilton's grand ballroom shimmered as if someone had bottled midnight and poured it into the chandeliers. Silver balloons hovered against the ceiling. A giant clock projected above the stage ticked closer to midnight, and the champagne tower gleamed like a fragile monument in the center of the room. Music pulsed through hidden speakers, couples laughing as they circled the polished dance floor. I stepped through the double doors binder pressed against my side under my coat, and for a moment I thought my knees might buckle. My heart thudded so loudly I could barely hear the band. No one looked at me directly, but I felt the brush of eyes sliding past. Curious, dismissive, then gone. At the far end of the room, Madison sparkled in a metallic gown that caught the light with every turn. Daniel straightened her necklace, smiling as if he had won a prize. My mother's face glowed with pride, her hand looped through my father's arm. The four of them looked like a painting, perfect, untouchable. I slipped past servers carrying trays of champagne, murmuring apologies when one almost collided with me. The binder tugged heavily at my shoulder, each step forward like dragging chains. "Emily." My father's voice cut through the noise. He moved toward me, his jaw tight, the smile he'd worn for others long gone. He stopped close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath. His tone was low, a growl meant only for me. "This is your last chance," he said. "Apologize to your sister tonight. Do it in front of everyone and we can move on. If you don't," his eyes bored into mine, "you're not my daughter anymore." The words pierced sharper in person than they ever had over the phone, the weight of them pressed down, daring me to fold. I gripped the binder strap so tightly the edges dug into my palm. My throat ached, but the answer came out steady. "Then so be it," I said. For a second his face flickered. Shock, anger, disbelief. Before he turned his back and strode toward the stage where the microphone waited. I stood frozen, the room spinning with laughter and clinking glasses. No one noticed me, the forgotten daughter, standing at the edge of their perfect celebration. The binder burned against my side, heavy with years of proof. I drew in a breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped deeper into the ballroom. The clock above the stage ticked toward midnight, each second echoing louder than the last. The giant clock above the stage ticked down from 2 minutes, the crowd already chanting with the band glasses raised high. My father's voice boomed over the microphone, cutting clean through the noise. Before we ring in the new year, he said, his words heavy with authority. "My daughter, Emily, has something to say. She owes her sister an apology, and she will give it now." The cheers faltered voices, stumbling into uneasy murmurs. I felt every eye shift toward me, the air in the ballroom thinning. The music softened as the band exchanged confused glances, their instruments trailing off. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped forward, the binder digging into my shoulder. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each sound too loud, too final. Guests parted like a tide whispers rippling through the room. I stopped at the champagne tower, its crystal glasses stacked like a monument waiting to collapse. With both hands, I pulled the binder free and set it down hard on the table beside the tower. The thud echoed startling in the silence. "I don't owe Madison an apology," I said, my voice cracking at first, but steadying as I went on. "What I owe is the truth. 7 years of it." My fingers flipped open the binder to the first page, the yellow highlights glowing under the chandelier light. In 2016, I paid $8,500 for Dad's heart surgery. From 2017 to 2021, $14,700 in utilities. Electric gas internet. From 2018 until this year, $25,000 to cover Madison's debts. Rent, credit cards, flights she called business trips. The total blazed at the bottom of the page, $48,200. Gasps punctured the room. I looked up and saw my mother's face blanch. My father's mouth pressed into a thin line. Madison let out a laugh, brittle and high-pitched. She lifted her champagne glass with a hand that shook slightly. "She's just being dramatic, trying to make herself the center of attention." "Ni. Isn't that right, Em?" A few nervous chuckles followed, but they died quickly as I pulled out taped text messages, holding them up like evidence in court. June 12, 2020. I read, my voice firm. "Please, Em, just this once. I'll pay you back next week." July 4th, 2021. "Emergency, can you cover my rent?" August 15th, 2022. "It's only a flight to Denver, I'll reimburse you." None of it ever paid back. Not $1. I held the pages higher. "This isn't drama." This is proof. Daniel's glass slipped from his hand, crashing against the floor, champagne splattering across his shoes. The sound jolted the crowd, silencing every whisper. The band stopped altogether, leaving only the ticking of the countdown clock echoing in the hall. I stared at Madison, whose smile had frozen into something brittle, eyes darting around the room as though searching for a way out. Around us, the party had died. Balloons drifted slowly from the ceiling, the smell of spilled champagne sharp in the air. And in that stillness, I felt the power shift. Not to me, not yet, but away from her. Away from the perfect picture she had painted. The clock read 1 minute 30 seconds, and the silence felt louder than any celebration. For a moment, no one moved. The room was held hostage by silence, the countdown clock still ticking above us. Then a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Aunt Margaret pushed herself to her feet, her voice shaking but clear. If it weren't for Emily, this family would have fallen apart years ago. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some guests nodded subtly. Others avoided eye contact. Madison's head snapped toward her, eyes blazing. "You're lying!" she screamed, the glitter of her gown catching the light as she stepped forward. "She's jealous, she always has been. She can't stand that I'm the one people care about." I felt the heat of her words but stood rooted to the spot, binder still open beside me. My mother stumbled closer, tears streaking her mascara. She clutched at my arm. "Emily, please don't do this. Not tonight. Don't ruin everything." Her fingers dug into my sleeve, desperation raw in her voice. I pulled free gently but firmly. "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped hiding it." Across the room, my father's eyes were fixed on the floor, his shoulders hunched, wineglass trembling in his hand. For once, the man who had ordered me to apologize had nothing to say. Daniel shifted uncomfortably near the edge of the dance floor. His face was pale, lips pressed thin. When Madison reached for him, he stepped back. She grabbed at his jacket anyway, her nails catching the fabric. "Don't just stand there. Tell them she's lying." Daniel shook her off, his voice low but steady. "I can't. Madison. Not when the evidence is right in front of me." The crack in her perfect facade widened her mouth, opening and closing soundlessly. He turned and walked toward the doors. The ballroom hushed, all eyes following. Madison lunged after him, clutching at his sleeve, but he wrenched free. "Don't leave me!" she cried, her voice breaking. The doors slammed behind him, the echo rolling through the hall like thunder. Guests shifted their whispers, rising. "Did you hear what she said?" $48,000? Unbelievable. Some guests put down their glasses, murmured excuses, and slipped out. The grand party began to thin, the energy draining like air from a punctured balloon. The countdown hit 30 seconds, voices half-heartedly trying to pick it up, but the cheer sounded hollow. Mom sobbed into her napkin. Dad kept staring at the ground. Madison stood alone in the middle of the room, trembling with rage and humiliation. I stayed near the champagne tower, my binder resting solid and undeniable beside it. The glasses shimmered precariously, a fragile monument to the night's pretense. Madison let out a strangled cry and slammed her palm against the table, sending a tremor through the stacked glass. Gasps rippled as the tower wobbled, glasses sliding against each other. Then with a terrible crash, the structure collapsed, champagne cascading across the white tablecloth and spilling onto the floor. The sound drowned out the final seconds of the countdown. Balloons fell, confetti cannons exploded in awkward bursts, but the celebration had already died. I stood there watching the glitter drift to the floor and felt the truth settle, heavy and certain the party was over, and so was the illusion of our family. Sunlight cut across my blinds the next morning, far too bright for how little sleep I'd gotten. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. When I finally reached for it, the screen was littered with notifications. Twitter threads, Facebook tags, even messages from coworkers. One headline glared back at me. "Daughter disowned at New Year's Eve party after exposing family's secrets." Another tweet read, "Imagine raising a child only to banish her for telling the truth. Unreal. Hundreds of comments flooded underneath strangers debating my life as if it were entertainment. I scrolled until my chest ached. Hashtags trended. Hatch family. Drama. Dad truth hurts. I closed the app and opened LinkedIn out of habit, only to find Madison's profile under fire. Comments from colleagues stacked up. Is this true? Hard to trust someone who hides behind family money. One even said, regretfully postponing our contract negotiations until this matter is clarified. It should have thrilled me seeing her world unravel. Instead, all I felt was an odd lightness, as if the weight I had carried was finally set down. No joy, no triumph, just quiet release. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Jason. I almost ignored it, expecting another demand, another insult. But when I opened it, the words startled me. You were right. I was wrong to say those things. I'm sorry, Em. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. No excuses, no requests. Just an apology. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small circle closing. I set the phone down, letting the moment settle. Minutes later, the ringtone I knew best pierced the room. Dad! I hesitated, heart hammering, then pressed accept. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Emily. I swallowed hard. Yes, Dad? There was a pause, the kind filled with years of unspoken things. Then he said, You've saved this family more times than I can count. The hospital bills, the utilities, the nights we didn't lose the house because of you. And His voice cracked. I never thanked you. I never saw it the way I should have. Tears blurred my vision. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, afraid to breathe. I was wrong, he continued. I let pride blind me. I let your mother's favoritism and Madison's shine convince me you were less. But you were the one holding us together, and instead of gratitude, I gave you cruelty. I owe you more than I can repay. I owe you my life. I owe you this family's survival. I'm sorry, Emily. The words echoed in me, filling the hollow spaces I'd carried since childhood. My throat closed, but no sound came out. I sat there gripping the phone as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. For the first time in my life, my father's voice carried not authority, not judgment, but truth. And hearing it left me utterly still, like the world itself had paused to let me breathe at last. The envelope had been sitting in my mailbox for 2 days before I found the courage to open it. Heavy cardstock Northwestern's crest stamped in silver. I carried it up the stairs of my apartment like it might burn me if I looked too closely. At my kitchen table, I tore the flap and pulled the letter free. We are delighted to offer you admission to the Kellogg School of Management MBA program. The words blurred, then sharpened again as my vision cleared through tears. I pressed the paper to my chest, sinking into the chair. For years, I had poured every ounce of myself into everyone else's future. And now, finally, I was holding something that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Just 4 words. Are you doing okay? No mention of the party of the year we'd spent in silence. Just a cautious olive branch, too thin to grasp but not sharp enough to cut. I typed back, Yes, I'm okay. Nothing more. Madison hadn't spoken to me once. No texts, no calls. Her silence was louder than any insult, but I found I didn't crave her voice anymore. Whatever world she lived in, it no longer touched mine. Dad called sometimes, his tone gentler now. We didn't speak about that night at the Hilton, but the shadow of it lingered in every pause. He asked about my classes, about my apartment, about whether I was sleeping enough. Once he said, I'm proud of you. And though the words came late, I let them land softly. I opened a savings account labeled Aurora Fund. At first, it only held $1,200, but I checked it like a child guarding a secret. Each deposit brought me closer to standing beneath Iceland's northern lights, a dream I had scribbled in journals back in college and buried under years of utility bills. At night, after long hours studying, I would imagine myself wrapped in a heavy coat, breath visible in the frigid air, staring up at a sky alive with color. For once, the light would be mine to witness, not Madison's, not anyone else's. The apartment was still small. The couch still sagged, but something inside me had shifted. My life wasn't a ledger of debts anymore. It was a path stretching forward, uncertain but entirely mine. I folded the acceptance letter back into its envelope and placed it beside the binder on the shelf. 2 books, side by side, one filled with every sacrifice that had drained me, the other promising a future I had claimed for myself. For the first time, I felt free. If you've ever been turned into your family's wallet, if you've ever carried burdens that were never yours to hold, share your story. Only when we set boundaries do we reclaim our freedom, our dignity, and our future.